On.
Okay, welcome everyone to our weekly Bible study. I trust, again, you're having a glorious day. If you don't sing, but you make a joyful noise, your tune today is, "This is the day the Lord has made," and we rejoice. Well, today we're going to start a new study, and I'm on the life of Esther. We finished up the life of Moses, and so we're going to take probably about a month to 2 months to look at the life of Esther. And I think we're going to find it most interesting. I continue to learn, and I hope that that will be part of your experience as well. And I thought before we get started into the story itself, that we kind of do a timeline. We have a historian among our midst, and he's teaching me to appreciate more and more history. And so I always like to put stories within a context that takes place. So I thought we'd take a look here and just get an overview of some things that happened prior to that actually influence the story that we're going to be talking about for the next couple of months. So you got to go back all the way back to 606 BC. 606 BC. And it's the first time the Babylonians have come and they invaded Judea and they attack Jerusalem. Now, they don't stay very long because it's during this time that Nebuchadnezzar gets wind that his dad, because Nebuchadnezzar's not the king, his dad dies. He's just a general out doing all kinds of expansion of the empire. His dad dies, and he immediately leaves Jerusalem to go back to Babylon in order to assume the throne. But before he leaves, he grabs about 70 members of the royal family. Now, we know several of them, and in probably later this year, if not the beginning of next year, we're going to look at the life of Daniel, because Daniel and his friends were part of that entourage that were taken out of Jerusalem. But he leaves Jerusalem intact. He puts a puppet king there, and they pay taxes. That was the great way the emperors of the old did. They kind of left everything intact. They didn't destroy it because they wanted the people to be paying taxes. You know, they needed to raise money. So the Jewish people, being what they were like when they were wandering through the wilderness, as we did in Moses, they weren't getting along very well. And they got a little rebellious. And so Nebuchadnezzar had enough of it. So after a number of years, in 597, he goes back to Jerusalem, and this time he takes a larger contingency. It's during this time that one of the characters that we're going to meet in the Esther story, his great-great-grandfather, it's Mordecai's great-great-grandfather, was removed from Babylon during this invasion from Nebuchadnezzar. 11 years go by, Jerusalem and the first temple are finally destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Then a number of years go by, and it's during this time that, of course, we'll talk about Daniel. He's in Babylon, and lots of good things are happening. Eventually, Persia raises its might, and it goes and it captures Babylon. It doesn't destroy it, it captures it. When we come to Daniel, we'll talk more about that incredible event that took place. Shortly thereafter, Daniel, who's in a place of position, he has some people that are envious of him. And so through a series of things that happen, Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. Of course, we know the story that God delivers him, and great thanks. Daniel lives a few more years before he passes away. So then about 14 years pass after that, and Darius takes the throne. Now, Darius is not Cyrus's son. There's actually another king in between there. He's related, but he's not a grandson, but he's related, I think, by marriage. He takes the throne. It's under Darius in 522 that the Persian Empire expands. In just a moment, I'll show you a map of how large the Persian Empire was. It was larger than any empire up to this point. It was larger than the Assyrians, larger than the Babylonians. In fact, you'll see as the empires progress in ancient times, they each got progressively bigger. By the time you get to the Roman Empire and the Greek Empire, they're much bigger than the Persian Empire. But once the interesting thing that happens under Darius' reigns that's going to influence the Esther story is Darius has visions of expanding the territory even more. It gets big under his reign, but he wants to take over those Greek states like Athens and Corinth and Sparta. And so he attacks them. He doesn't do very well. He keeps getting repelled there, but that sets in motion some things that we're going to visit again when we get to the Esther story. In 486, Xerxes, if you have a King James version, it's called Ahasuerus. That's the same person. It's Xerxes. Xerxes the first becomes the ruler of the Persian Empire. He begins in 486. 3 years go by. He throws this party that we're going to talk about hopefully today, we'll get to. And in the process, he loses his queen, his wife, because he was an idiot. Yeah, he just was very foolish. I guess that's the nice way of saying it, but he was an idiot. Okay. And so he loses his queen. Now we think when we read the story that immediately Esther is going to become the queen. Actually, years are going to go by before Esther becomes the queen. And we'll talk about that when we get into the details of the story. She becomes the queen about 5 years after this party, this event that took place under Xerxes. And then it's another 4 years before many of the events of Esther actually take place. So that's kind of the context of what's taking place. We've got the Babylonians, and they're bringing people in from the Jewish people into their territory. That included some of Esther's relatives like Mordecai. Probably Esther's grandparents also came in from one of those excursions of Nebuchadnezzar. And of course, then we get the Persian Empire, and the Persians are in control when we have the story of Esther. Here's a map of the empire. You can see that it goes all the way over near India. In fact, there some parts of India were under Persian control. So places like Afghanistan today, and some of the stands, all those stands that were in the Soviet Union up there in the north near the Caspian Sea, they were part of the empire. Of course, we see here Parthia and Media, that's in modern day Iran. And you see a little in the middle there, you see a little city called Susa, S-U-S-A. That's the city where the story of Esther takes place. It's not the only capital. They had a summer palace and they had a winter palace. And so this was one of the two palaces that the kings, the emperors, the leaders of Persia lived in. You see, it's not very far from Babylon, which is in modern day Iraq. So, when Persia conquered them, it wasn't a big move. There are some mountain ranges that separate those two, which kind of made it a natural barrier for many in the ancient world. And then, of course, they moved all the way down into Egypt. As far down as modern day Ethiopia. So if you go down here into Egypt, you see Memphis there, and you see Egypt, and you go south there along the Red Sea. Okay, it goes all the way down into modern day Ethiopia. And that would be important because there are lots of mines and minerals that were mined during this time. And then they went all the way over to Macedonia. Now, if you remember from our history lessons last year, I think it was, Tony, is we know that Macedonians they kind of didn't consider themselves Greeks. Well, at least the Greeks didn't consider them Greeks. They were kind of a separate entity. Alexander the Great was a Macedonian. And so the Greeks were further south there in Athens and Sparta and Corinth. Those were the kind of the big areas there. And so Macedonia was part of the Persian Empire. But those city-states, those Greek cities down in the peninsula were not part of the empire. And that's what Xerxes' father went after. He wanted to expand his territory down there because it was all about expansion. It's kind of like, is my empire bigger than your empire? Is my pile of stuff bigger than your pile of stuff? And so that was the mindset during this time. Well, let's do an overview of our story. First thing we want to mention is that God or Jehovah is never mentioned in the book. People find this fascinating. And yet you see the hand of God at work. And as I was thinking about that this morning, I was reviewing my slides and I thought about how many times has God been at work and haven't noticed it until as I think about it after the fact. That how many times has God been part of our lives and there's not that recognition that takes place. But then as we look back and see what God has done in our life, we say, wow, God was there. God was leading. That looked like that was a mistake, or that looked like that was just a coincidence. And you realize that wasn't a coincidence. That was God at work. And so if we think about it from that point of view, you can see God very much involved in this story. The second thing I find is this: it's a story of intrigue. It has lots of twists and turns. There's a time towards the end of the story where you think, wow, this is where the book should end. But there's 2 more chapters to go. Okay. And all of a sudden you got this new twist that comes into place. The other day, I was talking with my granddaughters. They're 10 and 12. And we got talking about Esther. And I realized something about Esther because I was wanting to share with them all the things I learned. And as I was beginning to share, my wife, Judy, looked at me with that look that says, do you really want to go there? And then I realized that maybe because of kids, we want to make this story a little bit more palatable to a younger person. We've cleaned up the story a little bit. Well, we're not going to, we'll obviously not say anything we shouldn't say, but we're going to tell you what the true story was, because there's some events in the story that, for example, we have this idea, it was a beauty pageant. Well, trust me, ladies, none of you want to be involved in the beauty pageant that Esther had to be involved with, because it was not by choice, okay, that you had to participate in this. And how did you win this prize? Yeah, well, we'll talk about that as well. So I find this story, the more I dig into it, intriguing, because it reveals, well, the times in which it lives, but I realize that maybe the times are not so different than the times we live in today, that there was really a dark side to a lot of people's behavior and everything else. And Esther gets caught up in the middle of that, nothing that she did, and she still becomes a real beacon of light in the midst of the darkness. What else do we learn? Well, we got this teenage beauty is forced to marry a middle-aged man. Okay, so he's about 40 years old when they get married. Now, the scripture tells us that when they went looking for the replacement, the queen replacement, they were looking for virgins. In the context, in the Hebrew, that literally means that they were not married or hadn't had kids yet. Okay, it's a much broader term than technically the word virgin that we use today. And so here is this teenage young lady who's probably in her mid-teens, because that would be marriageable age. And so she's not married yet. So that means that she wasn't in her 20s or 30s. She's a teenager, which actually makes the story more interesting to me, because here's a teenager that is so wise beyond her years at certain parts in the story. And she marries this middle-aged 40-year-old guy. He literally did rob the cradle, right? We also see in this story blatant anti-Semitism. Okay. And we got one character that epitomizes this. And you're going to see, and in fact, when the Jews were going through World War II, they actually saw one of the characters and his behavior as indicative of what they were experiencing in Nazi Germany in the 30s. Because a lot of the things that happen, there's a lot of similarities. Obviously, there are things that are different about it, but this blatant anti-Semitism. Now we're going to talk about where it came from, because it didn't come out of the clear blue. You know, the character who's the wicked Haman, there's actually history there that goes back hundreds of years that led to what he was expressing. Another thing I see in this story is the importance of godly counsel. One of the things that Esther had was she had a cousin. Now, some of us think it's an uncle. It's actually they're first cousins, who raised Esther. And Mordecai, who is one of the other main characters in the story, he provides some strategic counsel at important times in Esther's life, which again speaks to the role that many of us can play, because all of us have had years of experience, and that opportunity when we finally get asked the question where we can give that godly, insightful counsel pays huge dividends. I tell my students at the university, I says, if you want godly counsel, don't ask your peers, because they may be godly, but they don't have any experience. Okay. Go ask someone who's weathered the storm, who's been through it, who's seen God at work, who's seen God help them and strengthen them during those difficult times. Go seek that wise, godly counsel. We see the role of godly counsel in the story. We also see the importance of how one person can make a difference. Mordecai realized, that's the cousin, realized that while he was in a role of leadership, there was not a whole lot he could do. In fact, his power was being limited by his counterpart in Haman, okay, or Haman, if we spoke in the Hebrew way, Haman. But the point was, Esther was in a role, and because she understood that by Mordecai's counsel, she was able to make a significant difference. So there are four main characters in the story. There's Esther, the main character. Then there's her first cousin who raised her. In other words, her parents were killed and she was orphaned. And so he took her up, whether he adopted her or he raised her. In other words, he was her guardian, and they were first cousins. Appears to be years apart, but still first cousins. Then we have the king, Xerxes. He's the other third character, the king. And then we have the evil one, Haman, or Haman, as we pronounce his name. Okay. And so we're going to look at those four characters. Now, we know her as Esther, but Esther is not her Hebrew name. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah. Hadassah, that's her Hebrew name. And it means in Hebrew, myrtle, for the myrtle tree. Okay, it actually means that, which some interpret to believe, and I kind of like this, is that there was always a pleasant fragrance about the myrtle tree. And so when they named her Hadassah, it wasn't about that she was a tree, it was about the fragrance that came from it, that she had this just so nice. People just enjoyed being around Esther. Because remember, children were not named until they were at least a few days old. So you got to kind of see some of their personality coming through in those early days. But her Persian name is Esther, and it means morning star, morning star. Another name she could be called is Ishtar. Ishtar was a goddess related to this. And so some people think she was named after a pagan god. But again, it was about the beauty, the morning star. This was the name that was given to her. More than likely, the name was given to her when she finally came into the king's court. She probably was known by Hadassah when she was growing up as a little girl. And then later on, so as the story is being written as looking back, they're writing because that's what they called her when she was queen in Persia. So that's kind of an overview of our story. So let's get into the story. Xerxes' plan. It is 483 BC. Xerxes been in power for 3 years. He's 35 years old at this time. Now, by the time he gets around to marrying Esther, that's going to be another 5 years. So that's when he's 40, but he's 35 right now. And he's inherited from his dad. Remember that map I just showed you? That's what he inherited. It had 127 provinces there. So it was a very well-established, successful empire. And his dad was a genius for establishing local control, because you can't control everything from Susa. Okay, there's just no way. So you had to have local control. And we see most of the empires did something similar to this. Now, Xerxes had one ambition, and that was to do what his father couldn't do. He wanted to subdue those Greek city-states and bring them into the empire. His dad had tried for years. Tony, I don't remember. It seems like there was like 4 or 5 expeditions. I don't remember how many expeditions that Darius took in, but it was not just one expedition. There was a whole series of expeditions his dad had done. In fact, at one point, he had burned down the city of Athens. Now, Athens wasn't the big metropolis as we think of it today, but he had burned it down. But eventually, the Greeks rallied and would kick the Persians out. So when Xerxes came to power, that was his one ambition. And so all of the events we see here in chapter 1 are him wanting to do this one thing, and he's trying to get the support, rally the support to do another campaign into the Greek. So again, his father had tried, and but they had repelled. So here's his plan, and this is where the story begins. Okay, so knowing this backdrop really makes this part of the story for me a lot more interesting, because it makes a whole lot of sense what he was doing. It wasn't that they were just trying to have a party for a long period of time. There was a intention that Xerxes had when he threw what we will later call the party. So let's read from chapter 1. These events that he's about ready to share, whoever the author is here, happened in the days of King Xerxes, who reigned over 127 provinces, stretching from India, the west coast of India, all the way down to Ethiopia. We showed that on the map. At that time, Xerxes ruled his empire from Susa. So the events that we're going to read about in the life of Esther are happening there. Remember, there was another capital that was further north, but for this time, it's in the south. In the 3rd year of his reign, that's the 483, he invited all of the military officers of the Persian Empire, as well as the princes and nobles of the 127 princesses. Now, you don't have to be a real math genius to figure out we're talking about hundreds of people here. He's talking about a large military operation. So he's bringing in all of his high-ranking military officers. He's bringing in not only those that are governing the provinces, but those that were nobled there. So if he's bringing them in, he's probably bringing their spouses. So we're probably talking hundreds and hundreds of people are converging on Susa for this event that King Xerxes is about ready to do. And the celebration lasted 180 days. It was a tremendous display of the opulent wealth of his empire and the pomp and splendor of his majesty. Now, we get this idea that it was 180 days of partying. That wasn't it at all. It was kind of like a military expo. You've seen pictures of places like Russia on May Day. They bring their military, and they have these parades where they have all of their soldiers and the latest military gear. That's what he was doing here. He was basically bringing out the greatness of the kingdom. Maybe he brought people in and says, hey, listen, here's a bunch of Ethiopians that we just conquered, or here's a bunch of people over from India. In other words, it was all about showing how great the empire was. So here is an artist's rendition of the royal palace of Susa. This is the palace. This isn't the city. This is the palace. Okay. And so you can see off there to the upper right around the building, there's lots of gardens. This is going to be important because the whole city is going to turn out for a 7-day party in those gardens. So they must have been some magnificent as well as large series of gardens. So this is an immense palace. Again, he's controlling probably at least a third of the known world, because people knew about China and some of the other places. They didn't know about the Americas, but they knew about this part. So tremendous wealth in the city of Susa. So when the 180 days were over, the king gave a party, a 7-day party for all the people from the greatest to the least. So he brought the whole city, he invited the whole city. So for 180 days, for half a year, he's showing, or 3 months, excuse me. No, that's 6 months. Got it right the first time. 6 months. He's showing off the greatness of the empire. Now he ends this with just an incredible party. It's party time, folks. And he invites the whole city to join them. And it lasted for 7 days, scripture tells us, and was held in the courtyard of the palace garden. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white cotton curtains and blue hangings, which were fastened with white linen cords and purple ribbons to silver. I'm convinced a woman had to have written this, because I don't know that a guy would have ever written this stuff down. Now that's a joke, but there's a detail here. It's showing off. It's extravagant because the average person is not seeing this. And so they're bringing in the military, but they're also bringing in the people and says, look we're incredibly wealthy. And by the way, just take a look at the trimmings, the curtains, the hangings, linen cords, purple ribbons to silver rings embedded in marble pillars. Gold and silver couches stood on a mosaic pavement of marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. I mean, folks, this is riches beyond riches that he's ending this party with. Drinks were served in gold goblets of many designs, and there was abundance of royal wine, reflecting the king's generosity. And by edict of the king, by the way, let me just pause there. An edict was required because what you're about ready to read was not typical. In other words, they actually limited in many of these gatherings around the king the amount of alcohol, but for whatever reason, he decides to have an open bar for everyone, but he's got to do it by edict because it was something that was outside the norm, outside the customs. So he establishes an edict that no limits were placed on the drinking for 7 days. For the king had instructed all of his palace officials to serve each man as much as he wanted. Can you imagine what that place looked like and smelled like after 7 days of alcohol? All right. Now, again, this is a rendering of what the courtyard would have looked like. It was actually more like a park because there would have been wild animals in this park. There would have been birds, obviously they would, if they were dangerous animals, they would have had them tied up. It's just beautiful, beautiful landscaping, okay, in these courtyards, because they wanted to feel like they were in the outdoors here. So this is where this party for 7 days is taking place. So he hosts this week-long party after the 180-day expo. And there's probably a parade of captured slaves. I mentioned that. Shows of wealth and military prowess, music, dancing, and of course, lots of drinking. Now, why? Why did he spend so much money? Because this had to have cost an arm and a leg for the king to do all of this. It's because he wanted to convince the 127 provincial leaders to support another campaign into Greek territory. They had been burned with his dad. They had gone on these trips and come back defeated, and they weren't exactly excited about shedding all kinds of blood again, even though I'm not so sure sometimes the kings really cared about that type of thing, but they surely cared about the dollars it costs to support. Think of trying to ship an army by boat and overland that's going to be gone for years at a time, and you got to pay them, and you got to provide all the military equipment. It's a very costly operation. And so he's needing financial support, and he's needing soldiers for the campaign. Again, reluctance. So Xerxes is trying to woo them to support this next try. That's the context of the beginning of the story of Esther. Is here is a king who wants to outdo his dad, wants to expand the territory, and he's spending who knows how much money to raise money. You've heard the old adage, it takes money to make money. Well, this is probably that phrase on steroids, okay? Spending all kinds. Now, the garden takes place in the garden setting. large park with trees, wild animals, lots of water, fountains. Love that. The pillars, it said, from tradition came from Solomon's temple. They had been carted off by Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon. But when Persia, tradition has it that when Persia went in and conquered Babylon, it took all of that wealth of Babylon, because they didn't destroy Babylon. They took the wealth and they brought it into the Persian Empire. And so they believe many of the pillars there were from Solomon's temple. Wine flowed, no limitation, no restraint. Now we come to the interesting part, well, one of many interesting parts of the story, and everyone's drunk. Is any good going to come out of this whole scenario? Well, not likely. Xerxes is drunk, and probably all 127 provincial leaders are drunk. So on day 7 of the party, Xerxes sends 7 eunuchs. Now, why does he send 7 eunuchs? Because these eunuchs would carry a litter. They would carry the seat, the chair that the emperor would be ridden around in. In other words, he didn't have to drive his own vehicle. He got chauffeured. Well, they didn't have cars and everything else and horses and buggies. They just got 7 eunuchs and they became part of the bringing. So she is being instructed. He sends to Vashti, his wife, these 7 eunuchs. The idea is she's supposed to come to the party. Now, where's Vashti? Why isn't she at the party? Because she's hosting her own party. Now, tradition gives us 2 possible reasons for why she was hosting her own party. And it was primarily for the women. It was primarily for the wives. The first one is most of the women didn't want to be part of that 7 days of drunkenness because they figured it was just crazy what was going to happen. They didn't want to be part of it. That would make sense. I actually think, though, it's more of the second. Tony got me on this thinking about this, and I actually think there's some truth to this. It was very common that, and in fact, it was Xerxes. It would have been the king before him, before his dad. Okay, he's not related, but it was king before him, who there was an overthrow that took place under his rule, and that's how Darius became the king of Persia. So it was very common for there to be attempts to overthrow, to do a coup to overthrow the emperor. And what better place to have a coup is that you got all these leaders in one spot. And so some believe that part of Vashti's responsibility is we're going to throw an extra party, but we're going to make sure they don't leave, because if one of these people decide to do a coup, we've got all these hostages here. Okay. And that would make sense considering how they constantly were trying to overthrow each other. So Xerxes' wife, Vashti, what makes her interesting is that she's related to Nebuchadnezzar. She is the daughter of King Belshazzar. Now, who's King Belshazzar? Well, you got to go back to the story of Daniel, but Belshazzar is throwing this banquet towards the end of the Babylonian reign. You remember the finger of God starts writing on the wall? That's Belshazzar. Okay. Vashti is Belshazzar's daughter, which would make her King Nebuchadnezzar's great-granddaughter. So what happened is that, again, in order to kind of build alliances and everything else, she had been given to Xerxes as the queen to kind of make peace, among all the different people groups. So she would be what we would call a trophy wife, literally because of her heritage. Hey, you ought to meet my wife. She's the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. Everybody knew about Nebuchadnezzar. Everyone knew about him. Really, I got to meet this woman. She must be something to behold. Okay. And not only is she beautiful, but she's strong-willed and determined, which I have to give her credit. I have no idea what her relationship with God, but the woman had some morals about her. So here's this drunken husband who decides he's going to invite his wife. Now you think that's innocent. Hey, Vashti, come and join us at the party. But it's sinister what he's got planned. And we actually have evidence of this from the rabbis who write about this event, because she's ordered to be a spectacle. The 7 eunuchs are to carry the litter to inspire patriotism and loyalty, and she's to wear only her crown. One of the residents just said here, no way. Okay. So I got a verse here that says, when you're drunk, you do stupid things. Okay. Drunk men do stupid things that they later regret. This is actually taken from Proverbs. It is not for kings to guzzle wine. Rulers should not crave alcohol, for if they drink, they may forget the law and not give justice to the oppressed, or they do other stupid things like Xerxes just did. So he sends off these 7 eunuchs, bring her to us. We're going to display her, and all the guys are going to, yay, that's wow, this is just ridiculous. So, kind of give you a feel, found a picture. So picture that here he's surrounded by all this people and everything else, and he says, hey, go get my wife. That great granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. You guys, you ought to see her. She is something to behold. Okay. But she refuses. Smart lady. She will not appear before all men who are drunk. And she is the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. And show a little respect here. Okay. I may be your wife, but I'm not here to be oodled by everyone else in the world. She is insulted, not wanting to be humiliated, belittled, or objectified. She literally was being treated like a piece of asset. Okay, a chattel as we know it. Now, you know the story. Xerxes is furious, but he's also embarrassed. What's he going to do? And of course, he's drunker than drunk. Okay, and he's lost face, and he's enraged. And so he goes and he seeks counsel from other drunk people. So if you're drunk, that's not the people you want to go get a counsel from. Okay. So he goes to his advisors who are drunk, and they're not sure what to do. We can't let her get away with this. So the story goes on. He panics. And this is what the scripture says about the story. He immediately consulted with his wise advisors. Now, they may be wise, but they're crazy at this point because they're drunk, who knew all the Persian laws and customs. They actually were 7 nobles of Persian media. So these were people that were well established and recognized within the empire. And they often met with the king regularly and held high positions in the empire. So this is his inner court, his council. And the question on the table is, what do we do with the queen? What penalty does the law provide for a queen who refuses to obey the king's orders? That was properly sent, by the way, because when he sent, he wasn't asking his wife. It was a formal demand. And when the king says, you come, this was not open for discussion. This is official. This is the mandate. The president wants to see you is not a suggestion. You go see the president. Okay. And he had sent a delegation of eunuchs. They were probably his private bodyguards, because that would have been common. So what do we do? So one of the nobles, and I can't act like I'm drunk because it'd be interesting to see what this sounded like, when you're half out of it. Queen Vashti has wronged us. Not only the king. Okay, so now we're going to make this issue bigger than it was. It was an issue between the king and the queen, but now we're going to make it a national crisis. Okay, so he says, not only wrong the king, but also every noble, every citizen throughout your empire. This is called hyperbole, folks. Women everywhere will begin to despise their husbands when they learn what the queen has done, who refused to appear. No one probably ever told him what she was asked to do. Before this day is out, the wives of all the king's nobles throughout Persia will hear what the queen has done and will start treating their husbands the same way. Sometimes this guys really need a kick in the head sometimes, right? So if it please the king, we suggest that you issue a written decree, a law of the Persians and the Medes, or the Medes and the Persians, that cannot be revoked. It should order that Queen Vashti be forever banished from the presence of King Xerxes, and that the king should choose another queen more worthy than she. You need to put worthy here in quotes, because what she was asked to do was not an act of anything related to worth. Whatever their rank, will receive proper respect from their wives. Now, I'm going to close by giving some thoughts about this, because I find this whole episode to be at best bizarre, and at worst just totally, I can't believe it. So what's the fear? The fear is Vashti is going to set a pattern for the rest of the women in the kingdom. And by George, we can't have that. So we got to deal with this thing immediately before he gets out of control. Got to remember, Xerxes drunk. So he issues an edict called the Laws of the Medes and the Persians. Cannot be revoked. This becomes an important part of the story. You're going to see this happen several times in Esther's story. And the edict is that men are in charge or must be in control. Now, I have news. Well, we'll get to that. They make the situation worse. Again, the original issue was about Vashti, but now we have a national issue. Now, here's the key lesson for me. If you have to say, I'm in charge, it's a sign you're not in charge. If you're having to tell everybody that I'm the boss, it means that you may have the figurehead, but no one cares what you say and no one's following you. If you're going around dictating, I'm the boss and you'll do what I say, you are of the weakest type of leadership imaginable. And that's exactly what he did. He played the fool here. And his advisors walked him into this. I'm not so sure how smart Xerxes was, considering some of the other things that he's going to do. But the point is that his advisors led him down a fool's path and saying, we're going to make an edict to tell everyone that men are in charge. Culturally, they probably were. That should have been enough. But when you're having to now make it an official statement, it would be like someone saying, we are going to make a law of township that requires everyone to be kind to each other. Really? That should be something we want to do. That should be something that's built within our DNA. When you have to say, you have to be kind, or you have to do something. So when you say, I'm in charge, it's a sign you're not in charge. Secondly, demanding respect misses the point, because respect is something that's earned, can never be demanded. When someone follows you, the best kind of leadership is when they follow you because they want to follow you, they have respect for you, they trust your leadership, and that you're going to take the organization going forward. It doesn't matter what your title is. Okay. So when you and I get into the point where we're demanding respect from each other, you will respect me, or else what? Okay. You can't demand that. That's something that's earned. Okay. It's kind of like sometimes, we talk about kids. The kid says, you don't trust me. Yeah, because we've been living with you for 14 years and everything indicates I shouldn't be able to trust you. So I'll start trusting you when I see some evidence I can trust you. That's something that's seen. Same thing with respect. It's something that's earned. Okay. Now, we all have the honeymoon phase of leadership. It's kind of like the first 100 days of the presidency, kind of like everyone's nice. We give them a chance and then we find out what they're made of. And after 100 days, it's usually open war, because we find out we voted in something that was very different than when we thought it was going to be. Respect. So Vashti is banished. Now, probably if you read the wording, back and go read the wording, it says that she was to be banished from the presence of the king. It doesn't say that she got kicked out of the city. More than likely, she got banished from the harem so that she would never come in contact with the king. So it wasn't like she was thrown out on the streets, but obviously her place of prominence within the palace was totally gone at this point. This is probably a good place to start because we're going to pick up the story about how Esther enters the story here, but this lays the backdrop for the story of Esther. So there's a couple of things I want us to think as we close up our time today. If we're going to get trust, we need to live in a way that people will give us trust. I think many times we're too busy demanding certain things, and if we would just be kind and gracious and really provide what people need, the world would be a whole different place. Okay. Second of all is never make important decisions when you're drunk. Now, we're laughing at that. I've never been drunk, so I have no idea what I'm talking about here. Unfortunately, I've been around a few drunks in my life, and some of them are mean, some of them are funny. It's kind of nice to be around the funny ones, but you're never sure what's going to show up when they get drunk. But they do some of the stupid and say some of the stupidest things. Okay. And I don't know why people think that's cool, but okay, whatever floats your boat type of thing. But the point is that he went and sought counsel. Probably it was a good thing he sought counsel, but he went to the wrong sources because they were in the same shape he was in. Where we go seek counsel does matter. Where we go seek counsel, that matters. As I said, I talk to my students about this all the time. Who are you talking to? You're thinking about getting married? Don't talk about the person who got married 6 months ago. Talk about the person who survived 40 years of marriage or 50 years of marriage. They weathered the storms they went through because they've got something to contribute and speak into your life. And again, as I said, this is going to be an important part of the whole story of Esther, is this godly counsel that she is going to receive. But we start out with the story about a person who went and got anything but godly counsel. And it made the whole situation much worse. And the last thing I would share is whenever you're trying to make decisions of what you do, you need to ask yourself, what's going to be the outcome if I go down this path? Because surely somebody should ask the question, what's going to be the result of this edict? Okay. First of all, King Xerxes, did you know your wife well enough to know that she wasn't going to buy into this? Or were you so oblivious that you think she was going to be party to this incredible event that you're wanting her to parade herself in front of? Okay. Sometimes we're so focused on ourselves, we don't have any social awareness. In the business world, we call that EQ, social intelligence. I don't think Xerxes, he would have been a negative score on the social intelligence thing here because he totally missed, because he was so totally absorbed. And I think it behooves all of us to, in the scriptures, countless examples of where the Bible says, well, the second command, love your neighbor as you love yourself. It's thinking about others. Philippians chapter 2 is serve one another. Paul talks about in several of his letters about serving one another. Think about that other person. Put yourself in their shoes, as the old Indian proverbs, walk in their moccasins. Hey, surely if Xerxes had done that, he wouldn't have gotten himself into this mess. Well, that's kind of the introduction to the story. Next week, we'll get into how she becomes queen, and it is a fascinating story. Ladies, you're going to come. You want to see how long you need to bathe in oils and perfumes and everything else before you get married. All right, let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you for your love. We thank you for this day you've given to us. We have so much we can learn from your word. It puts it right out there, and it really reveals what happens when we really don't follow the teachings of your word, and how foolish and crazy life becomes, unnecessarily so. So, Father, may we be wise. Lord, as many of us are the years we've got grandkids and maybe some great grandkids, Lord, may we realize that There are moments, there are seasons when we can speak into their lives. And may we take advantage of those, because we never know when they're going to come. They may be visiting, they may be on the phone or in Zoom, and they ask a question, and we're in a hurry. We got something to do. May we realize that at that moment, speaking into that young person's life is more important than probably most anything else we were going to do. So may we take advantage of that. Keep us safe, Lord, and bring us back together next week. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. God bless everyone. Thank you for being here. Have a blessed day.